The night was cold and unforgiving, the kind that wrapped the world in an eerie silence broken only by the occasional rustling of the wind. Tom Reynolds, a seasoned truck driver, gripped the steering wheel of his 18-wheeler as it rolled down the desolate stretch of highway. It was just another late-night haul, one he had done countless times before. Tom prided himself on his ability to stay alert even during the loneliest hours, but something about this particular night felt different. The highway seemed emptier than usual, the darkness heavier, almost pressing against his windshield. As he adjusted the volume of his favorite classic rock station to fend off the quiet, Tom noticed something up ahead. At first, it looked like a pile of rugs lying near the shoulder of the road, barely visible under the dim glow of his truck's headlights. But as he drew closer, his heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just a breeze, it was a figure, small and fragile, shivering in the freezing cold. Tom's instincts kicked in. He slowed his truck, pulled it to the side, and grabbed his flashlight from the dashboard. Stepping out into the biting wind, he called out, "Hey, you okay?" His voice echoed into the emptiness, unanswered. The closer he got, the more he realized it was a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, dressed in nothing more than a thin sweater and jeans. She was huddled against a guardrail, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her face pale and frightened. "Sweetheart, what are you doing out here all alone?" Tom asked gently, kneeling beside her. The girl flinched at first, her wide, tear-filled eyes darting up at him, but she didn't speak. Tom noticed her lips were trembling, not just from the cold, but from fear. Something was terribly wrong. "It's okay," he said softly, shrugging off his thick flannel jacket and draping it around her tiny shoulders. "You're safe now. I'm not going to hurt you. Let's get you warmed up." He scooped her up carefully and carried her to the warmth of his truck, where he wrapped her in a blanket and handed her a bottle of water. As she sat there, thawing out in the passenger seat, Tom trying to piece together what could have led a child to be stranded on a highway in the dead of night. He asked her simple questions. Her name, where she lived, if she was hurt. But the girl remained silent. She clutched the blanket tightly and stared at the floor, her small hands shaking. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she whispered, "Please don't let him find me." Her voice was so faint, Tom almost didn't catch it, but the words hit him like a freight train. "Who, sweetheart? Who are you talking about?" he asked, trying to keep his tone calm despite the chill running down his spine. The girl hesitated, then looked up at him with eyes that seemed far older than her years. "The man, the one who hurt my mom." Tom's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just a lost child. This was something far more sinister. He knew he had to act fast. Grabbing his phone, his fingers hovered over the screen as a million questions raced through his mind. Who was this man? Where was her mother? Was he still out there, searching for her? Tom made the call to 911, his voice steady despite the urgency in his heart. "I've got a little girl here," he told the operator. "She's scared cold and says someone hurt her mom. You need to send help. Fast." As the dispatcher assured him that officers were on their way, Tom glanced at the girl again. She was looking out the window now, her expression blank, but her body tense, as if bracing for something terrible. Tom couldn't shake the feeling that whoever she was running from might not be far behind. And so, with his truck parked on the side of that lonely highway, Tom waited. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the tension in the air so thick it was almost suffocating. He kept the engine running, the headlights piercing into the darkness, watching for any sign of movement. What was this little girl's story? And more importantly, would they have enough time to keep her safe before her past caught up with her? The silence in the truck was almost unbearable, broken only by the hum of the engine and the faint, rhythmic sound of the little girl's shaky breaths. Tom glanced at her again, his heart heavy with questions he didn't know how to ask. Her tiny frame seemed even smaller wrapped in his oversized jacket, her eyes darting to the window as though expecting something, or someone, to appear. Tom cleared his throat gently, hoping to ease her tension. "You're doing good, kiddo. Help's on the way. They'll make sure you're safe, okay?" He tried to sound reassuring, but the doubt lingered in his own mind. The girl didn't respond. Instead, she clutched the blanket tighter, her knuckles white as she stared at the road ahead. Tom felt an ache in his chest. Whoever she was running from must have done something terrible to make her this scared. "You know," he said after a pause, his voice soft, "when I was a kid, I used to be scared of the dark. Thought every shadow was hiding something bad. My dad used to tell me, 'Tommy, there's nothing out there you can't handle.'" He chuckled nervously. "Guess I didn't always believe him, but he was right. You're stronger than you think, kid." The girl turned her head slightly, her expression unreadable. Tom wasn't sure if his words had reached her, but at least she wasn't completely shutting him out. He decided to try again. "Do you have a name, sweetheart?" he asked gently. For a moment, it seemed like she wouldn't answer, but then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Mia." "Mia," Tom repeated, nodding. "That's a pretty name. I'm Tom." He offered her a small smile, hoping to make her feel more at ease. "You've been real brave tonight, Mia. Can you tell me where you came from? Maybe where your mom is?" At the mention of her mother, Mia's face crumpled and tears welled up in her eyes. She looked down at her lap, her small shoulders trembling. Tom immediately regretted pressing her, but knew he needed to understand more to help her. "It's okay," he said quickly, his voice steady and calm. "You don't have to say anything you're not ready for. You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you." Mia wiped at her eyes with the sleeve of the jacket and looked up at him, her expression a mix of fear and determination. "Mom told me to run," she said finally, her voice trembling. Tom's stomach twisted. "Run from what? Mia? Was someone chasing you?" She nodded, biting her lip. "The man. He came to our house. He was yelling, and Mom told me to hide in the closet. She said not to come out, no matter what." Her voice broke, and she sniffled, trying to hold back more tears. "But I heard him hurt her. I couldn't stay. I got scared and ran out the back door." Tom felt a lump in his throat as he listened to her story. The weight of what she'd been through was unimaginable for a child her age. He clenched the steering wheel tightly, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. "You did the right thing, Mia," he said after a moment. "You're so brave for getting away. And don't worry, the police will make sure your mom's okay." He hoped his words were true, though he couldn't shake the unease creeping into his thoughts. Mia hesitated, her gaze drifting back to the window. "What if he finds me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Tom's jaw tightened. "He won't. Not while I'm here," he said firmly. "And the police are on their way. They'll keep you safe, I promise." He wished he could offer her more than just words. The thought of someone out there, dangerous and possibly looking for her, sent a chill down his spine. He kept one eye on the side mirrors, scanning the darkness for any headlights that didn't belong. Minutes felt like hours as they waited. Tom couldn't help but replay Mia's words in his mind. The man, the yelling, the sound of her mother being hurt. Whoever this guy was, he clearly wasn't afraid to cross lines, and that made him unpredictable and dangerous. Tom glanced at the clock on the dashboard, willing time to move faster. "Where do you live, Mia?" he asked, trying to gather more information while they waited. "By the woods," she said softly. "Our house is small. Mom always says it's cozy." Tom nodded. He could picture it. A modest little home tucked away in a quiet area, probably far enough from neighbors that no one would have heard anything. It explained why Mia had ended up on the highway. The main road might have been her only option for escape. "Your mom sounds like a smart lady," Tom said, hoping to keep Mia talking. "She did everything she could to protect you." Mia's lower lip trembled, and she hugged the blanket closer. "I want her to be okay," she whispered. "She will be," Tom assured her, though the weight of uncertainty pressed heavily on his chest. "The police are good at what they do. They'll find her and make sure she's safe." Mia didn't say anything, Her eyes held a glimmer of hope, fragile but present. Tom's phone buzzed on the dashboard, and he quickly grabbed it. The 911 operator was calling back. "Mr. Reynolds," the operator said, her voice calm but urgent, "officers are en route to your location. They should be there within the next 10 minutes. Do you have any updates on the situation?" Tom glanced at Mia, who was watching him closely. "The girl's name is Mia," he said, keeping his tone steady. "She mentioned a man came to her house and hurt her mom. She said she ran away and ended up on the highway." "Understood," the operator replied. "Please keep her calm and stay where you are. Do you feel you're in immediate danger?" Tom hesitated, his eyes scanning the rearview mirrors again. "Not yet, but I'm keeping watch. I don't know if the guy she's running from is looking for her." "We'll advise the officers to approach with caution," the operator said. "Thank you for staying with her. You're doing the right thing." After ending the call, Tom set the phone down and exhaled deeply. 10 minutes. It didn't sound like much, but in this situation it felt like an eternity. He turned to Mia, forcing a reassuring smile. "The police are almost here. They'll take care of everything, okay?" Mia nodded, though her small hands remained clenched in the blanket. Tom kept his eyes on the mirrors and the road ahead, his senses on high alert. The night seemed darker than ever, the quiet almost oppressive. He couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't entirely alone out here. And then, just as he began to let himself hope that the worst was behind them, a faint light appeared in the distance, growing brighter by the second. Headlights. A car was approaching. Tom's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his heart pounding. Was it the police? Or was it someone else? Tom's pulse quickened as the headlights drew closer. The vehicle was still too far to make out any details, but something about its speed seemed off. It wasn't moving steadily like a passing car or a patrolling officer. It swerved slightly, almost as if the driver was searching for something or someone. "Mia," Tom said quietly, his voice low but firm. "I need you to stay quiet, okay? No matter what happens, just stay right here in the truck." Mia's eyes widened in fear, and she nodded, clutching the blanket like it was the only thing tethering her to safety. The approaching vehicle slowed down as it neared. Tom's instincts screamed at him to be ready for anything. He reached for the tire iron tucked behind his seat, his fingers wrapping around its cold, solid handle. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The car, a beat-up dark sedan, rolled to a stop a few yards behind the truck. Its engine idled loudly, the sound reverberating through the still night. The headlights cast long, eerie shadows across the road, illuminating the rear of Tom's trailer. For a moment, nothing happened. The doors didn't open. No one stepped out. The car just sat there, its engine rumbling like a predator biding its time. Tom's grip on the tire iron tightened, his eyes fixed on the mirrors. He could feel Mia's gaze on him, her silent terror palpable in the cramped cab. Then the driver's side door creaked open, and a figure emerged. A man tall and broad-shouldered stepped into the headlights' glow. His movements were deliberate, almost too calm, as he began walking toward the truck. Tom's breath hitched. There was something about the way the man carried himself, confident, unhurried, like he knew he had the upper hand. The man was dressed in dark clothes, his face partially obscured by the shadow of a baseball cap. Tom leaned out of the window slightly, his voice steady despite the tension in his chest. "Can I help you?" he called out, trying to sound casual. The man stopped a few feet from the truck, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. "Evening," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Seen a little girl around here? About high?" He motioned with his hand, his tone almost too casual, like he was asking for directions instead of a missing child. Tom's stomach churned. He didn't need to ask to know this was the man Mia had been running from. Every fiber of his being screamed to protect her, but he also knew he had to play it smart. "Nope," Tom replied evenly, shaking his head. "Haven't seen anyone all night. Just me and the open road." The man tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing. "That's so," he said, taking a step closer. "Funny. I thought I saw someone climbing into your truck a little ways back." Tom's heart raced, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Must have been seeing things," he said, shrugging. "Long nights out here can mess with your head." The man's lips curved into a thin, unsettling smile. "Maybe," he said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe a word of it. His gaze lingered on the truck for a moment before he took another step closer. "Mind if I take a look, just to be sure?" Tom's jaw clenched. He knew he couldn't let this guy anywhere near Mia. "Look, buddy," he said, his voice firm. "I don't know who you are, but you're not searching my truck. If you've lost someone, maybe you should call the police." At the mention of the police, the man's expression darkened and his posture stiffened. "You sure about that?" he asked, his voice carrying a subtle threat. Before Tom could respond, the distant sound of sirens cut through the tension like a blade. The man's head snapped toward the direction of the noise, and for the first time, his calm demeanor faltered. Tom seized the moment. "Looks like help's on the way," he said, his voice steady but laced with warning. "You'd better get moving if you don't want to answer any questions." The man hesitated, his jaw tightening as the sirens grew louder. For a second, Tom thought he might try to push his luck. But then the man turned abruptly and walked back to his car. Without another word, he climbed in and sped off, the tires kicking up gravel as he disappeared into the night. Tom exhaled sharply, his hands trembling as he set the tire iron down. "It's okay, Mia," he said, glancing at her. "He's gone." Mia didn't say anything, but her eyes were wide, her face pale. Tom could see the fear etched into her small features, and it broke his heart. The flashing lights of police cruisers appeared in the distance, the sirens cutting off as they pulled up behind the truck. 2 officers stepped out, their expressions serious but calm as they approached. Tom climbed out of the cab, his legs still shaky. "She's in the truck," he said, motioning toward Mia. "Her name's Mia. She said she ran away from someone who hurt her mom." One of the officers nodded and headed to the passenger side to speak with Mia, while the other stayed with Tom. "Did you see anyone else out here?" the officer asked. Tom hesitated, debating whether to mention the man. He didn't want to scare Mia any more than she already was, but he knew withholding information could put her in more danger. "There was a guy," Tom admitted finally. "Showed up in a dark sedan, said he was looking for her. He didn't stick around when he heard the sirens." The officer's expression hardened. "Did you get a good look at him? Or the car?" "Not much," Tom replied. "It was dark, and he had a cap on. But he didn't seem like the kind of guy you'd want to cross paths with." The officer nodded, jotting down notes. "We'll put out an alert. Thank you for staying with her. You probably saved her life tonight." Tom glanced back at the truck, where the other officer was talking gently to Mia. She looked so small and fragile, but there was a flicker of hope in her eyes now, a faint light that hadn't been there before. "I just did what anyone would do," Tom said quietly. As the officers began their investigation, Tom couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this wasn't over. The man in the sedan might have driven off, but something told him he wasn't done looking for Mia. And Tom knew one thing for sure: he wasn't about to let her face that danger alone. The night felt heavier now, the weight of the encounter lingering like a storm waiting to break. Even as the police reassured Tom that they'd keep Mia safe and investigate the man in the sedan, something didn't sit right with him. The look in that man's eyes was burned into his memory. A cold, calculated gaze that spoke of someone who didn't give up easily. The officers suggested Tom take Mia to the station, where she could stay safe until they contacted child services. Mia clung to Tom's arm, her small fingers trembling against his jacket sleeve. She didn't say much, but the look she gave him spoke volumes. It wasn't just fear, it was trust, a fragile bond forged in the chaos of the night. Tom agreed, but as they pulled onto the highway with a police escort, his mind kept racing. Something about this didn't feel over. He glanced at Mia in the passenger seat. She was staring out the window, her knees pulled up to her chest under the blanket. "You okay, kiddo?" he asked, his voice gentle. Mia nodded slightly, but she didn't turn to face him. Instead, she whispered, "He's not going to stop." Tom's chest tightened. "Who's not going to stop, Mia?" "The man," she said softly. "He always finds me." Tom's hands gripped the wheel tighter. The way she said it, so resigned, sent chills down his spine. He thought about the man's car disappearing into the darkness, the way he'd looked so sure of himself. He couldn't shake the feeling that Mia was right. The police cruiser ahead of them signaled for a turn, leading them off the main highway onto a smaller road. Tom followed, but his unease grew with every mile. The road was darker here, the streetlights spaced far apart. Trees loomed on either side, their shadows stretching across the asphalt like long, clawed fingers. Mia suddenly sat up straighter, her eyes wide. "He's here," she whispered. Tom's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? How do you know?" She didn't answer, but her gaze was fixed on the side mirror. Tom glanced over and felt his stomach drop. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance, moving fast, too fast. He grabbed his radio and called out to the officer ahead. "Hey, we've got company behind us. Could be the guy I mentioned earlier." The officer's calm voice crackled back. "Roger that. We'll slow down and assess the situation." But the car behind them didn't slow down. It sped up, closing the gap alarmingly fast. Tom's pulse raced as the vehicle swerved into the other lane, its headlights flooding the side of his truck. For a split second, he caught a glimpse of the driver's face, and his blood ran cold. It was the man from earlier, his jaw clenched, and his eyes locked on the truck like a predator zeroing in on its prey. "Stay down, Mia," Tom ordered, his voice firm, but shaking with adrenaline. He reached for his phone, dialing 911 as he kept one hand on the wheel. "This is Tom Walker. We're being pursued by a black sedan on Route 7, heading south. Need immediate assistance." The police cruiser ahead of them flicked on its sirens and lights, swerving into the middle of the road to block the sedan's path. But the man didn't stop. Instead, he'd veered onto the shoulder, gravel spraying as he attempted to overtake the police car. Tom's truck shook as the sedan surged forward, its engine roaring like a beast. Mia let out a small cry, curling into the seat as the tension in the cab thickened. The officer in the cruiser attempted to maneuver, but the sedan clipped their rear bumper, sending the police car skidding slightly. The officer managed to regain control, but it was clear this man wasn't going to back down. Tom's mind raced. He couldn't outrun the sedan, not in a truck this size. And with Mia in the cab, he couldn't risk anything happening to her. He needed to think fast. Up ahead, the road curved sharply, with a dirt trail branching off to the left. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. "Hang on, Mia," Tom said, his voice steady despite the chaos. He yanked the wheel, steering the truck onto the dirt trail just as the sedan closed in. The tires kicked up clouds of dust, obscuring their pursuer's view for a moment. But Tom knew it wouldn't buy them much time. The trail wound through dense woods, the branches scraping against the sides of the truck like claws. Tom's headlights barely lit the path ahead, but he pushed forward, hoping the uneven terrain would slow the sedan down. The police cruiser followed close behind, its sirens now muted, likely to avoid giving away their position. But the sedan wasn't far behind. Its headlights cut through the dust, a relentless reminder that the man wasn't giving up. Mia's breathing was shallow, her small frame trembling as she huddled against the door. "Tom," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the engine. "He doesn't want me to tell." "Tell what?" Tom asked, his focus split between the road and their pursuer. Mia hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. "About my mom," she said finally. "About what he did to her." Tom's chest tightened. Whatever this man had done, it was enough to terrify a little girl into silence. And now he was willing to do anything to keep her from speaking out. The trail suddenly opened into a clearing, the moonlight spilling over the empty expanse like a spotlight. Tom spotted an old, abandoned barn at the far end of the clearing. It wasn't much, but it might provide some cover. He gunned the engine, steering the truck toward the barn. The sedan followed, its tires skidding on the loose dirt as it struggled to keep up. The police cruiser was right behind, its blue lights flashing like a beacon in the darkness. Tom pulled the truck to a stop just outside the barn, quickly shutting off the headlights to keep their position hidden. "Mia, stay low and stay quiet," he said, his voice firm but kind. She nodded, her wide eyes glistening with tears, and slid down onto the floor of the cab. Tom grabbed the tire iron again, his knuckles white as he gripped it. He didn't know what was going to happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let that man get to Mia. In the distance, the sedan's headlights cut through the trees, growing brighter as it neared the clearing. Tom's heart pounded in his chest as he braced himself for what was to come. The air felt electric, charged with the anticipation of a confrontation that could end in disaster. The man wasn't just chasing Mia anymore. He was chasing the truth, a truth she carried with her, a truth that might finally bring justice for whatever horrors she had endured. And as the sedan rolled into the clearing, Tom knew this was it, the moment everything would come to a head. The only question was whether they would make it out in one piece. The sedan screeched to a halt just yards away from the barn, its headlights illuminating the weathered wooden structure. Tom crouched near the truck, gripping the tire iron tightly, every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, drowning out the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. Inside the truck, Mia stayed as low as she could, her small frame trembling in the shadows. The blue and red lights of the police cruiser danced across her pale face as the officers moved into position, weapons drawn. For a moment, the tension hung heavy in the air, a silent standoff where everyone seemed to be holding their breath. Then the man stepped out of the sedan. His movements were deliberate, almost unnervingly calm, as if he held all the cards in his hands. He didn't seem fazed by the presence of the police. Instead, he walked into the beam of his car's headlights, his face illuminated in stark detail. Tom saw it then, the cruel twist of his mouth, the confident set of his shoulders. This wasn't just some random predator. This was someone who believed he had already won. "You've got no idea what you're getting yourself into," the man called out, his voice cold and measured. His eyes scanned the scene, landing briefly on Tom before shifting toward the truck. He must have known Mia was inside. Tom stepped forward, his grip on the tire iron tightening. "You stay away from her," he growled, his voice shaking but firm. The man smirked, his expression almost mocking. "You don't know what you're protecting," he said. "That girl is more trouble than you realize." The officers moved in, their weapons trained on the man. "Sir, step away from the vehicle and get on the ground," one of them ordered, his voice steady but commanding. But the man didn't flinch. Instead, he raised his hands slightly, as if to show he wasn't a threat. "I don't think you understand," he said, his tone eerily calm. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm here to clean up a mess." Tom's stomach churned at the words. He glanced back at the truck, where Mia was peeking out from the shadows. Her eyes were wide, her face pale as she watched the man with a mixture of fear and something else, recognition. "What are you talking about?" Tom demanded, stepping closer. The man turned his gaze back to Tom, his smirk fading into something darker. "Ask her," he said simply. "Ask her who her mother was. Ask her what her family does." The words sent a chill down Tom's spine. He turned to look at Mia, who had now climbed halfway out of the truck, her small hands clutching the doorframe. Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head, her lips trembling. "He's lying," she cried, her voice cracking. "Don't listen to him, Tom." But something in her tone made Tom hesitate. There was fear there, yes, but also a hint of something else. Guilt. The man took a step forward, ignoring the officer's shouted warnings. "She knows," he said, his voice low and almost taunting. "She knows why I'm here, why I can't let her go." The officers reacted, one of them moving to tackle the man, but he didn't resist. Instead, he let himself be pushed to the ground, his hands clasped behind his head. As they restrained him, he turned his head slightly, his eyes locking onto Mia. "You can't run forever," he said, his voice almost a whisper, but sharp enough to cut through the night. Maya let out a choked sob and bolted from the truck, running straight into Tom's arms. She buried her face in his chest, her tiny body shaking as she cried. Tom held her tightly, his mind racing. "Is there something you're not telling me, Mia?" he asked gently, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she clung to him, her fingers clutching his jacket, as if letting go would make her disappear. Finally, she looked up at him, her tear-streaked face filled with desperation. "My mom," Maya stammered, her words catching in her throat. "She wasn't who you think she was. He's lying, but he's also not." Tom's heart sank. The cryptic confession raised more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. There was a deeper story here, one that Mia had been too scared to share. Before Tom could press her further, one of the officers approached, his expression grim. "We've got a situation," he said. "What now?" Tom asked, his frustration evident. The officer hesitated before gesturing toward the man. "He's not just some random guy. He's connected. FBI's already flagged him in an ongoing investigation." Tom blinked, the weight of the revelation hitting him like a freight train. What kind of investigation? The officer glanced at Mia, then back at Tom. "Human trafficking," he said quietly. The words hum in the air like a thunderclap, and Tom felt his grip on Mia tighten protectively. But as the officer continued, his tone shifted. "And it doesn't stop there," he added. "There's a network involved. He's just one piece of it. The girl, she might know more than she's letting on." Tom looked down at Mia, who was staring at the ground, her face pale. The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was darker than anything Tom had imagined. The stakes had just been raised, and the danger was far from over. As the officers secured the man and began coordinating with federal agents, Tom knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something far bigger and far more dangerous than he'd anticipated. And whatever came next, he and Mia were in it together. The barn was quiet now, save for distant murmurs of police radios and a shuffle of boots on gravel. Tom stayed close to Mia, his arm protectively wrapped around her. He couldn't shake the weight of the officer's words: human trafficking, networks, investigations. It was a world Tom barely understood, but one that Mia seemed to know too well. The man from the sedan was being loaded into the back of a police car, his expression calm despite the handcuffs digging into his wrists. He locked eyes with Mia one last time, a dark smirk pulling at the corners of his mouth. It was a silent message, one Tom couldn't decipher, but it made Mia flinch. Tom crouched down to meet Mia's tear-filled gaze. "Mia, whatever you know, you have to tell me now," he said gently but firmly. "I can't help you if I don't understand what's happening." She hesitated, her small hands trembling as she twisted the fabric of her oversized hoodie. "I didn't know everything," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I swear, I didn't know what my mom was doing." Tom frowned, the pieces starting to shift into place. "What was she doing, Mia?" he pressed, his voice soft but insistent. Maya sniffled, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of the truth was finally too much to bear. She was part of it, she admitted. The trafficking. She worked with them, but she told me it was for money. To keep us safe. I didn't know. Her voice cracked, and she broke into sobs. Tom's heart sank. He pulled her close, his mind racing. The man's cryptic remarks, Mia's fear, the FBI investigation. It all pointed to a far-reaching operation that Mia had been caught in the middle of, whether she understood it or not. Before Tom could say anything more, one of the officers approached. "We've got federal agents en route," he said. "They'll need to talk to the girl. She could be a key witness." Tom nodded, though his gut twisted at the thought of Mia being dragged into something so overwhelming. He looked down at her, her tear-streaked face buried in his jacket, and knew he had to stay by her side, no matter what. As they waited, the tension seemed to ease slightly, the quiet night settling over them like a fragile truce. But just as Tom started to believe the worst was over, a sudden noise shattered the calm. A car engine roaring to life in the distance. The officers turned toward the sound, their hands instinctively reaching for their weapons. Tom followed their gaze, his eyes widening as he saw another vehicle speeding toward them from the far end of the road. "Get down!" One of the officers shouted, and chaos erupted. The car skidded to a stop just feet from the scene, and two men jumped out, their faces obscured by masks. Before anyone could react, they opened fire, forcing the officers to scatter for cover. Tom grabbed Mia and dove behind the truck, his heart pounding in his chest. "Mia, stay down," he urged, shielding her with his body. The gunfire was deafening, the air thick with the acrid smell of burning rubber and gunpowder. Tom could hear the officers shouting, returning fire as they tried to regain control of the situation. He risked a glance around the side of the truck and saw the two masked men moving toward the police cruiser where the first man was being held. "They're here for him," Tom realized, the horrifying truth sinking in. One of the officers managed to hit a tire on the attacker's car, sending it lurching to the side. The distraction bought just enough time for backup to arrive, the roar of sirens filling the night as more police cars swarmed the scene. The masked men hesitated, realizing they were outnumbered. One of them barked something in frustration before they both bolted back toward their vehicle. But as they fled, Tom caught sight of something. A piece of paper fluttering from one of their pockets, landing just a few feet away. As the chaos subsided and the attackers sped off into the night, Tom crawled forward and grabbed the paper. It was crumpled and smudged, but the writing was clear, a list of names, addresses, and cryptic codes. He handed it to one of the officers, who immediately recognized its significance. "This could be a major break," the officer said, his expression grim but hopeful. But even as the situation seemed to stabilize, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. He turned to Mia, who was watching him with wide, fearful eyes. "Is your name on that list?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "No," she said, her voice trembling. "But I think my mom's is." Tom's blood ran cold. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Mia wasn't just a victim. She was the key to unraveling something far bigger than either of them had anticipated. As the federal agents arrived and began piecing together the night's events, Tom made a silent vow. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't let Mia face it alone. And just as he thought the worst was behind them, one of the agents approached with a grim expression. "We ran the name she gave us," the agent said. "Her mother isn't just involved, she's one of the ringleaders. And she's still out there." Tom's breath caught in his throat, the weight of the revelation hitting him like a freight train. This wasn't the end of their journey. It was only the beginning of a much more dangerous one. The air was thick with tension as the final pieces of the night's events began to settle. The federal agents worked quickly, gathering evidence, questioning officers, and poring over the list Tom had retrieved from the attackers. The hum of police radios and the occasional muttered exchange filled the silence, but Tom's focus remained on Mia, who sat huddled beside him on the tailgate of his truck. Her small hands clutched the edge of the tailgate tightly, her knuckles white. She hadn't said much since the agent's revelation about her mother, and Tom didn't push her. He knew how much she had already endured and how heavy the truth must feel for her. As the hours passed, the agents pieced together more details. The list Tom had found led to the identification of several key figures in the trafficking ring, and it became clear that Mia's mother had been deeply embedded in their operations. While Mia was young and innocent in all of it, her connection to the situation through her mother made her a vital witness. One of the agents approached Tom and Mia, his face a mixture of exhaustion and compassion. "We'll need to take Mia into protective custody," he said gently. "It's the safest option for her right now. If her mother or anyone else in the network knows where she is, she could be in serious danger." Tom's stomach sank at the thought of letting her go, even if it was to protect her. He looked down at Mia, who had been listening quietly. Her eyes welled up with tears, but she nodded, a bravery shining through her fear. "I'll go," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "If it helps stop them, I'll do it." Tom knelt in front of her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "You're the bravest kid I've ever met," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'll be here no matter what. You're not alone in this, Mia." She threw her arms around him, clinging to him tightly as fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. "Thank you, Tom," she said, her voice muffled against his jacket. "For everything." The moment felt heavy, bittersweet. Tom knew this was the best way to keep her safe, but it didn't make it any easier to let her go. The agents assured Tom that they would keep him informed and even arranged for him to have supervised visits with Mia once she was settled. It was a small comfort, but it gave him hope that this wasn't truly goodbye. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, the scene began to clear. The attacker's vehicle was towed away, the man from the sedan was transported to a secure facility, and Mia was placed into a black SUV with tinted windows. She gave Tom one last wave through the glass before the vehicle disappeared down the road. Tom stood there for a long time, staring after it. The night's events had left him shaken, but beneath the exhaustion and fear was a sense of purpose. He had stumbled into this situation by chance, but he felt like it had changed him in ways he couldn't yet fully understand. In the days that followed, Tom tried to return to his routine, but life felt different. Every time he got behind the wheel of his truck, he thought about Mia. He wondered how she was doing, whether she felt safe, whether she was scared. He stayed in contact with the agents, who assured him that she was adjusting well to her new environment. One afternoon, Tom received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a letter from Mia, written in shaky but heartfelt handwriting. "Dear Tom, I miss you, but I'm doing okay. The people here are nice, and they're helping me understand that none of this was my fault. I think about my mom a lot, and it still hurts, but I'm starting to feel stronger. Thank you for saving me that night. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stopped. You're the reason I'm safe now, and I'll never forget that. Love, Mia." Tom read the letter twice, his throat tightening with emotion. He folded it carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket, carrying her words with him everywhere he went. In the months that followed, the case against the trafficking network gained traction. The list Tom had found led to the arrests of several key players, and Mia's testimony proved invaluable in uncovering the full extent of the operation. While her mother was still at large, the network had been dealt a significant blow, and more victims were being rescued thanks to the information Mia provided. Tom stayed involved as much as he could, attending court hearings and advocating for tougher measures against trafficking. He'd felt a sense of responsibility, not just for Mia, but for all the kids who hadn't yet been saved. One evening, as Tom was wrapping up a long haul, his phone buzzed with a text from one of the agents. It was a short message, but it made his heart leap. "We got her. Mia's mother is in custody." Relief washed over Tom like a tidal wave. He knew it wouldn't erase the pain or undo what had happened, but it was a step toward justice, toward healing. A few weeks later, Tom received another letter from Mia. This one was more upbeat, filled with little drawings and updates about her life. She told him about the new friends she had made, the books she was reading, and how she was starting to dream about her future. "I want to help people, like you helped me," she wrote. "Maybe I'll be a lawyer or a social worker. I just know I want to make a difference." Tom smiled as he read her words. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of situations, there was room for hope, for growth, for second chances. As the sun set on another day, Tom climbed into his truck, ready for the next journey. The road stretched out before him, endless and full of possibilities. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he felt ready to face it, knowing that he had made a difference in one little girl's life. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.